Welcome back to part 2 of 40 death row inmates that died before their execution. Today's cases are organized so that the first ones are longer with more details and trails off with cases where I couldn't find a lot of information. We'll be talking about the Yakuza, terrorists, corrupt police, crazy-ass women, etc. But let's start off with a case that sounds like a full-on Yakuza movie. Here we go. Details of gruesome cases will be discussed from here on out. Viewer discretion is advised. Osamu Yano. In the Yakuza world, there's an image that conflicts often break out and many gang members are sacrificed, but there is also a taboo in conflicts. These are attacks in Giriba. Giriba refers to places where funerals and celebrations after prison releases are held, and shootings and conflicts at such places are said to be forbidden, the most taboo of taboos. The incident began at the Yotsugi Funeral Hall, which ignored this tacit understanding. This incident, which occurred on August 18, 2001, involved 2 executives of the Maeda family that was part of the Inagawa group who infiltrated the funeral hall where a Sumiyoshi group funeral was being held and shot and killed 2 of their group leaders. The 2 perpetrators were apprehended on the spot and confined in the Sumiyoshi group's office. The police told them to hand over the men, but the members of the group refused. The Inagawa group immediately disowned the 7th head of the Maeda family who ordered the murders, and the head of the Inagawa group headquarters retired to take responsibility. On the surface, it seemed like a settlement had been reached, but there was one person who was growing dissatisfied with this. That person was Osamu Yano, who was in charge of security on the day of the incident. This would develop into a major conflict between the Sumiyoshi and the Inagawa groups. The 2 perpetrators were eventually handed over and sent to jail. One of them was stabbed with a drill in the left chest and back by members of other Yakuza groups while making kendo equipment in Kumamoto prison and was seriously injured. The other one was beaten in the bathroom of Tokushima prison and later committed suicide. Osamu ordered his subordinates and gangs to attack Takeo Oda, who had been disowned for ordering the funeral hall attack. On February 21, 2002, his subordinates tried to attack Oda's house but failed. On February 24th, the head of the attacking team was shot 4 times. He was taken to Nippon Medical School Hospital where he underwent surgery and survived. However, the following day on the 25th, he was shot 3 times in the back and twice in the head through the window of the intensive care unit. At first glance, this seemed like revenge by the other side, the Inagawa group, but in fact it was not. He was killed by a man on Osamu's orders who was supposed to be his ally. Not only did the attack on Oda fail, but the man had left a cartridge case with his fingerprints at the scene, which enraged Osamu. Thus, he ordered a kidnap and murder of his subordinate in order to silence him. On March 1, 2002, Osamu ordered his subordinates to throw a Molotov cocktail at the home of Oda and to fire several bullets at it in a second attempt to kill him, but failed again. The attacks on Oda failed repeatedly due to strict security. The target was then changed to former boss Kunio Goto, who was the number 2 in the Maeda family. And it was this attack that led to the Maebashi snack bar shooting incident. During the Yotsugi Funeral Hall incident, according to a witness, Goto was apparently wearing a Sumiyoshi group badge and a tie with the Sumiyoshi crest. He therefore successfully slipped into the funeral disguised as a member of the Sumiyoshi group. On October 14, 2002, Osamu ordered his subordinates to attack Goto, who was leaving a golf course in Shirasawa village, Gunma Prefecture. They intentionally crashed their car into Goto's Mercedes-Benz as he was driving and fired 6 shots from a handgun. However, only one of those shots hit Goto in his right shoulder and the attack failed. The next planned attack was on a bar in Maebashi City, Gunma Prefecture. In January of 2003, Osamu's subordinates went to a hideout in Gunma. They spent several days at the hideout, but not knowing when the order to attack would be given, one of the men became mentally unstable. This caused a quarrel between the two, so another man was sent to replace him. At around 11 p.m. on January 25, 2003, Osamu called the men. Apparently, Goto, the target, had entered the bar, and he instructed them to head over there. When they arrived near the bar, there were two bodyguards in a Mercedes parked in front of the bar, even though they had been told that there was no one else there. As there was a possibility that there were regular customers inside, they called Osamu to ask him to cancel. A little later, Osamu called them back and said, "There are only 3 to 4 people in the bar. They're all Goto's friends and there are no regular customers." And so the men went ahead with the attack. First, they shot and killed a bodyguard, 31 at the time, entered the bar and fired their guns. There were 8 customers at the time and a female manager behind the counter. 4 people were killed in this attack. Contrary to prior information, the 3 people excluding the bodyguard who was shot dead in front of the bar were all regular citizens. Goto was shot once, which hit his left middle finger, and his acquaintance, a male chef, was severely injured and required approximately 6 months of treatment. Although his life was not in danger, he suffered from the after effects as his right thumb, which is important for a chef, could not move as it used to. The 2 men fled the scene after the shooting. On January 29th, one of the men from the bar shooting turned himself in and said, "I did it." However, his testimony was vague and did not match the circumstances at the scene, so he was released with charges pending. In April, in the investigation of the unsolved ICU shooting, I'll refer to him as N, then 56 years old, who was believed to be the perpetrator, was questioned. N initially refused to talk, but gradually began to feel remorseful and finally confessed in tears. He told investigators that Osamu ordered the hit. He broke the window from outside and fired his gun from a close distance of about a meter or 3 feet. He also testified that one of the men who was responsible for the shootout at the bar had fled to the Philippines. On July 8, 2003, Osamu was finally arrested on suspicion of arson at the home of the Almeida family. On October 30th, the man who fled to the Philippines was detained and deported to Japan the following day. The death sentences were confirmed for Osamu, who was the leader, and the 2 men who shot and killed several people at the bar. Although he was not involved in the execution of the crimes, the entire series of retaliation was under his orders, and as the mastermind was sentenced to death on March 14, 2014. On September 7th, Osamu, who was now on death row, wrote a letter to the Megiddo police station of the Metropolitan Police Department confessing to another murder. According to the letter, in April 1998, he killed Mamoru Saito, 49 years old at the time of his disappearance, and the president of a real estate company in Shinjuku Ward, Tokyo, and instructed a male acquaintance to dispose of the body. The motive for the murder was said to be from a financial dispute. Saito, who had borrowed 100 million yen, approximately $764,000 from Osamu, was left with 86 million yen, or approximately $657,000 unpaid, and said he would kill a man and steal the money to repay the debt. However, Saito was on friendly terms with a senior member of the Sumiyoshi group, and in order to prevent further trouble, Osamu imprisoned him in a cage meant for large dogs for 3 days. He then tied a tie around his neck and strangled him to death. He also sent another letter to Shibuya Police Station dated May 28, 2015, claiming to be involved in another murder. He was apparently asked by an acquaintance, a junior boss of the Sumiyoshi group, to kill a man who was causing trouble over redevelopment. So, Osamu told a subordinate to kill the man. Despite this confession, the Shibuya police station did not investigate and he was found innocent of the murders he confessed to. He had also sent a copy of the two confessions to a magazine publisher, and the editorial department continued to investigate. The article was published in the February 25, 2016 issue of Shukan Shincho. As soon as the Metropolitan Police Department learned that the article would be published, they began an investigation to save face. Then, on April 19, 2016, the man's body was found in the forest in Isehara City, Kanagawa Prefecture, exactly where Osamu said it would be. And in late November, human bones believed to be those of Saito were found in the forest in Tokigawa Town, Saitama Prefecture. Thus, Osamu, who was already on death row, went back on trial for the two new murders. He then stated that his confession of his involvement in the murder was completely false and claimed innocence. The prosecution pointed out that it was an attempt to postpone the execution of the death penalty, taking advantage of the fact that it could not be carried out during the trial. In the ruling on December 13, 2018, the credibility of his confession, which was the only direct evidence, was denied. The judge ruled that the testimony of those involved, which had been more than 20 years since the incident, had limited evidentiary value and acquitted Osamu. The fact that he was not found guilty and the trial ended abruptly was an unexpected surprise for him. He had been hinting at various crimes to the police, but they would not take any of them seriously except for the two that he was already sentenced for. Now that the trial, which was literally his lifeline, was over, he was left with only the time to wait for his execution, which, if you've seen my video about how executions in Japan work, didn't know when it would come. Osamu committed suicide in his cell at the Tokyo detention house on the morning of January 26, 2020. At around 7:47 a.m., when he had not woken up, staff entered his room and found him bleeding in his futon. There were cuts on both sides of his neck made with a homemade blade-like object. He was 71. He had apparently removed the blade of a pencil sharpener and used it to commit suicide. After this, in October 2020, the Ministry of Justice revised the instructions that stipulated the items that death row inmates can use in detention centers, and pencil sharpeners and pencils were taken off the list. It can be assumed that he was one of the men who couldn't live with the stress of not knowing when he would get a knock on his jail cell door, telling him that he had 24 hours to live. From left to right, Yasuhiro Sako, Shigeo Okazaki, Shoko Kumagai. Between July 1986 and May 1991, a group of 8 criminals, including former Iwate Prefectural Police Officer Shigeo Okazaki, committed 3 crimes for financial gain. Around July 15, 1986, Shigeo and his men lured Kiyoshi Nishimura, then 41, a financier from Morioka City, Iwate Prefecture, into a vacant house. After threatening him with a dagger, they tied his hands and feet to a chair with rope, blindfolded him, and stole his land registration certificate and a foreign car from his home. They then buried Nishimura alive in the mountains of Shizukuishi Town, Iwate Prefecture, killing him. Shigeo is said to have owed the man 2 million yen, about $13,000 in 1986 exchange rates. The 3 police officers, Shoko's younger brother, and a subordinate from the police force, a total of 5 people were involved in this case. On the afternoon of July 20th, 1989, Kenichi Makabe, then 48 years old, president of a painting company in Koriyama City, was called by a man claiming to be from a major construction company. Kenichi left the company saying he was going to meet someone for work and never returned. The following day, on the 21st, Kenichi contacted his family and the bank to prepare 17 million yen in cash and had senior employees deliver the cash to the parking lot of a family restaurant in Omachi, Koriyama City. He also instructed them to leave the cash in the car and return to the company. Employees who thought it was suspicious contacted the police. When the police arrived at the family restaurant, the car was already gone and communication with Keiichi had also ceased. Subsequent investigations found his car abandoned in the parking lot of a supermarket in Toromaru-cho, Koriyama City, but the cash was missing. After being kidnapped by the group, Keiichi was held captive in a rental villa. After the cash was stolen, he was strangled to death with a rope in a forest near the villa, and his body was dumped in a hole that had been dug beforehand. The 5 people from the previous case and an additional 2 people were involved in this crime, a former taxi driver and a painter, totaling 7. On May 1st, 1991, the group kidnapped and held Yuichi Takasaki, then 52 years old, a painter, captive in Ichihara City, Chiba Prefecture, and took a ransom of 20 million yen, approximately $160,000 in 1991 rates, from his wife. Yuichi was released 2 days later in Tochigi Prefecture. On that day, he received a phone call from the police requesting a paint job and was taken into a car in front of the main gate of the junior high school where they were to meet. In the car, a cloth bag was placed over his head. He was threatened, and on May 2nd, he called his wife to prepare the money. As instructed, his wife prepared the cash without alerting the police. On the 3rd, he had 2 male acquaintances deliver the ransom to a family restaurant parking lot in Utsunomiya City, Tochigi Prefecture. The 2 men left the scene for an hour, leaving the cash in the trunk, and when they returned, found Yuichi safely in the car, tied up with rope and blindfolded. In this case, a new painter, different from the previous case, also joined the crime. On May 4th, Yuichi filed a victim's report and an investigation was launched into the kidnapping for ransom. Based on his testimony, it was discovered that the place of his confinement was a rental villa in Nasushiobara, Tochigi Prefecture. It was also discovered that a suspicious car had been parked nearby on the day of the incident. The circumstances led to the suspicion that this case was related to the previous case I just described. In addition to the similarities between the cases, both victims worked in the painting industry. In light of this, a joint investigation was launched by the Chiba and the Fukushima Prefectural Police. Investigators from the 2 cities were paired up. This was an unprecedented setup. At the time, Gen Koyama, who was the head of the Fukushima Prefectural Police's first investigation division, said that he was able to deduce from the various aspects of the case that the offenders had knowledge of the police. The investigation also revealed that the renter of the vacation home was Yasuhiro, who was acquainted with Yuichi. On May 13th, the police determined that Yasuhiro and other key members were suspects and issued a nationwide wanted list. On May 14th, Yasuhiro was arrested while hiding out in a hotel. During questioning, he confessed to being involved in the past crimes as well, and by October 31st, everyone else was arrested. The 3 policemen were all sentenced to death. Shoko's younger brother and the former driver were sent to life in prison. The painter who was involved in the second case died of illness during the first trial, and the painter that was only involved in the last case was given 6 years imprisonment. The presiding judge explained that the 3 defendants, the policemen, played leading or important roles, and that without the power of any of them, the murder of the 2 victims would not have been realized. This was the first time that 3 defendants had received death sentences at the same time since 1965. The judge also rejected the defense's argument that the death penalty is a cruel punishment and unconstitutional, and declared that this was a large-scale, heinous crime committed intermittently by a large group of people over a wide area. In an appeal trial, the main issue was who led the crime, and defendants Shigeo and Shoko engaged in a battle in which they tried to shift the blame on each other over conspiracy before the crime and leadership during the crime. Defendant Yasuhiro also joined in, arguing that he only did what he was told and sought a reduction in his sentence. The defense argued that hanging violates Article 36 of the Constitution, which prohibits cruel punishments, and the question of whether the death penalty should be used became a focal point. The judge disagreed, and everyone's sentences were upheld. Yasuhiro Sako. He had been restricting his exercise due to pneumoconiosis, which is a type of lung disease caused by breathing in certain kinds of dust particles that damage the lungs, but died of acute pneumonia on August 15, 2013. He was 73 years old. Shigeo Okazaki. He had been complaining of nausea and dizziness since around June 20th, 2014, and after an examination on the 23rd was diagnosed with aspiration pneumonia, which occurs when bacteria enters the lungs. He was subsequently hospitalized in the detention center hospital, but his condition worsened, and he was confirmed dead at 1:39 a.m. on the 26th, aged 60. Shoko Kumagai. In December 2010, he was diagnosed with common bile duct cancer and was admitted to an outside hospital on January 17th of the following year and underwent surgery on the 19th. At around 2 p.m. on January 29th, while undergoing walking training, he complained of chest pains, lost consciousness, and died shortly thereafter. He was 67. Hiroko Nagata. Hiroko Nagata was born in Tokyo and, after graduating from high school, entered Kyoritsu College of Pharmacy, which is now Keio University, to receive training to be a pharmacist. During her time in college, she became involved full-time in left-wing politics, eventually becoming vice chairman of the United Red Army, or URA. She would work herself into what was described as a hysterical rage when excited, usually over political issues. She was described as physically unattractive and was, by the standard of medicine of that time, infertile from Graves' syndrome, which is an autoimmune disease that affects the thyroid and is the most common cause of hyperthyroidism. She was particularly harsh with other female members of her group. Japan's leftist student movement in the 1960s pervaded the country's universities and, by the late 1960s, had become competitive and violent. After a series of incidents in which student groups injured or killed law enforcement officials as well as the general public, Japan's National Police Agency cracked down on these organizations, raiding their hideouts and arresting dozens in 1971 and 1972. Attempting to escape from the police, a core group of radicals from the URA, including Hiroko, retreated to a compound in the mountain of Gunma Prefecture during the winter of 1972. During the second week of February 1972, at the compound, Hiroko and the URA's chairman, Tsuneo Mori, initiated a violent purge of the group's members. In the purge, the URA often forced each person to politically reflect on themselves, calling it sokatsu. This eventually developed into others giving their opinions and various criticisms to the person reflecting in order to help them realize their own situation. This broke down in the mountain-based URA, and the leader Tsuneo and all of the members began to use strong collective violence against one person to force them to reflect on their actions, and this essentially led to lynchings and purges. The victims, due to their political orientation, hardly resisted this violent act. As a result, some died from ruptured internal organs caused by the violence, while others were barely given food and were tied up and left outside in the freezing cold, leading to death. They named the violence assistance to sokatsu and justified it. The deaths caused by this assistance were called deaths of defeat because they died of shock and despair and not being able to reflect properly. 2 members, one of whom was a senior member, who were deemed unable to do so, were sentenced to death, stabbed multiple times with an ice pick, and strangled to death. There was no ideological reason behind these murders, and a former member testified. In the end, people who seemed to be a hindrance to Tsuneo Mori and Hiroko Nagata's leadership system were eliminated. I think it's the same as bullying. There's also a theory that it was a personal grudge caused by Hiroko's jealousy of the other female members and Tsuneo's personal complex. In a documentary, a former member of the United Red Army spoke of his past, quitting his job as an activist after his uncle said to him, "You say you will lead society in the right direction, but have you saved even one person?" Him and others who were minors at the time of the hostage takeover appeared on television. It was revealed that now in his 60s, he has become a member of the Liberal Democratic Party and has converted to conservative ideology, and that other former members that he's still in contact with have also converted. To recap, Hiroko and Tsuneo directed the beating deaths of 8 members and 1 non-member who happened to be present. 6 other members were tied to trees outside, subsequently freezing to death in the extremely cold weather, bringing the total number of deaths to 14. Hiroko especially targeted members who, in her opinion, took too much interest in relations with women and did not devote enough ardor to the revolution. A few were killed for attempting to escape. 1 member was killed for asking for some tissue paper while inside his sleeping bag, an act that she apparently construed as having a sexual significance. The revolutionary left also killed 2 people, a 20-year-old man and a 21-year-old woman who had escaped from the organization before the formation of the United Red Army. On February 16th, police arrested Tsuneo, Hiroko, and 6 other URA members both at the compound and at a nearby village. 5 others armed with rifles and shotguns managed to escape, fleeing on foot through the mountains toward Karuizawa in nearby Nagano Prefecture, eventually taking refuge in a mountain guest lodge, initiating the Asama Sanso incident. This incident began when 5 armed members of the United Red Army, following a bloody purge that left 14 members of the group, including 1 bystander dead, broke into a holiday lodge below Mount Asama, taking the wife of the lodgekeeper as a hostage. A standoff between Japanese police and the URA radicals took place, lasting 10 days. The lodge was a natural fortress. It was a 3-story wood and concrete edifice built into the side of the hill atop an exposed base of steel-reinforced concrete. The lodge towered over the steep, snow-covered slopes below, and its windows had heavy storm shutters. The building's maze-like floor plan and narrow staircases made it easy for the defenders to block off movement outside. The radicals would spend most of their time on the uppermost floor, which contained a kitchen, dining room, tatami mat sleeping room, and a commanding view of the surrounding valley and hills. The radicals placed large pieces of furniture and futon bedding around the doors and windows and secured them in place with wire. When the woman's husband returned from walking the dog and saw the barricades, he realized what had happened and quickly notified police. The police immediately set up roadblocks and surrounded the lodge to cut off any avenues of escape from the radicals inside. They initially decided to wait and see if they would surrender on their own. After 3 days without a surrender offer from the hostage takers, the police shut off the electricity to the lodge and set up loudspeakers from which the parents of several of the radicals implored them to surrender, to no avail. One of the participating parents' son had been killed in the purge incident, but both the police and the parents were unaware of this because the full extent of the purge had not yet become known. On February 25th, the riot police unit began to prepare an assault on the lodge. A crane equipped with a wrecking ball and an armored driver's compartment was positioned near the building, and police armed themselves with ladders, heavy mallets, and chainsaws. The hostage woman's husband implored the radicals by loudspeaker to release his wife, but was ignored. On February 27th, the police used a baseball pitching machine to bombard the building with rocks to keep the hostage takers awake all night. The police moved into position for the assault at 8 a.m. the following morning and issued a final ultimatum an hour later, which went unheeded by the radicals. At 10 a.m., the crane began to batter the lodge's walls with the wrecking ball. The police cautiously approached the building and began to break through the barricades. By noon, the police had occupied the 2 lower floors, isolating the radicals and the woman on the top floor. The police experienced difficulty in breaching their defenses on the top floor, and hours later had not made much headway. They directed high-pressure water hoses at the top floor, gouging out large holes in the building's walls and drenching everyone inside with cold water. During this time, the radicals kept up continuous gunfire on the assaulting police and threw homemade bombs at them. 2 policemen, Inspector Takami Shigemitsu and Superintendent Hisataka Uchida, were shot and killed, and 15 other policemen were injured. A civilian observer who intruded into the area without police permission was also shot, reportedly by the radicals, and fatally wounded. As darkness fell, the police finally breached the top floor's barricades and captured one of the radicals. The remaining 4 burrowed into a pile of futon bedding and refused to surrender. As the police approached them, one of them shot a policeman in the eye. He lost his eye but survived. Eventually, at 6:15 p.m., 280 hours after the incident began, the remaining 4 radicals were taken into custody and the hostage was rescued. She was cold but uninjured and told police that her captors had not mistreated her, although they had tied her to a bed during most of the standoff. That same evening, despondent over his son's behavior, one of the radicals' father hanged himself in his home in Otsu, a city near Kyoto. Hiroko Nagata was sentenced to death in the Tokyo District Court on June 18, 1982, and it was upheld by the Tokyo High Court and the Supreme Court of Japan. She submitted a plea for a retrial, but was declined by the courts on November 28, 2006. She wrote several books during her time in prison and attracted the attention of a support group. Her supporters reported that she had suffered from declining health, including a brain tumor, for several years, which had gone untreated. She underwent surgery for it in 1984. In 2006, she collapsed from brain atrophy and was transferred to a medical prison in Hachioji. By March 2007, she had become bedridden, and at 10:06 p.m. on February 5th, died of multiple organ failure at 65 years old. Susumu Nakayama. On March 16, 1968, Susumu conspired with a friend of his to raid a gun shop from where they stole a total of 4 rifles and 5 air guns. After that, he and several others decided to do a bank robbery, which they began planning sometime around January or February of 1969. In order to carry it out, Susumu raided several stores around Kochi, stealing bullets and gunpowder and even torching one of the buildings down to cover his tracks. He and his accomplices then stole a car and tested one of the rifles by firing a single shot at a public toilet. Finally, he attempted to steal a police officer's handgun. In response to the multiple crimes reported in the area, the Kochi Prefectural Police established a special unit to deal with the incidents. At around 9 p.m. on March 15, 1969, Susumu and 2 others ambushed a patrolling police officer near the Sagawa police station and shot at him with a rifle. Their timing was off, however, and the officer managed to escape unharmed. On the following day, the 3 men prepared rifles, bullets, and machetes and went to look for more policemen, but were forced to turn back after they failed to find any. Around 10:30, the trio were driving along when they stopped a 36-year-old motorist and threatened him with a .22 caliber rifle. When the man attempted to get help from passers-by, Susumu fired 1 shot into his arm in an attempt to intimidate him. But the man started to scream, prompting him to attempt to fire a second shot, which failed to discharge. He then fired a 3rd shot, which hit the motorist in the head, killing him instantly. The trio decided against stealing anything and instead put the victim's body in the car trunk, whereupon they transported it to a vacant lot 900 meters away from the crime scene and abandoned it there. The body was found at around 7:30 a.m. the following day, prompting officers from the local Yamada police station to form a special unit to investigate the murder. Initially, it was believed that the incident might be related to the recent shootings perpetrated by a different individual, but an examination of the shell casings ruled out that possibility. It was eventually established that Susumu and the 2 accomplices were responsible for this crime, leading to their arrests not long after. Having acquired carpentry skills in prison, Nakayama became seriously involved in the construction industry after his release while keeping in touch with his parole officers. At the time, he worked predominantly in the Kanto region, but after January 1995, when he became involved in reconstruction work following the Great Hanshin earthquake, he permanently moved into his brother-in-law's house in Toyonaka, Osaka Prefecture. In the summer of 1996, Susumu went to a coffee and snack bar near his brother-in-law's house where he became acquainted with one of the female employees. Despite technically being married and with 3 children, the woman was estranged from her husband and started flirting with Susumu, resulting in the pair beginning to date around November or December of that year. Around January 1997, he ended his work in the Kanto region and returned to his native Shinjuku, followed only a month later by his girlfriend and her 3rd son, who found a job as a nurse. Eventually, he broke up with another woman he was living with at the time, and sometime in May, he moved in to live with his girlfriend and her son. At the time, the woman was discussing potential divorce proceedings with her husband over the phone, but the man showed no interest in the matter and stalled the negotiations. Approximately a year later, Susumu contemplated breaking up with his girlfriend, but gave up on the idea when she told him that she wanted to be with him. Infuriated by the husband's refusal to divorce his wife, Susumu planned to kill him. On the early morning of February 16th, he gathered several spear-shaped knives and wrapped their handles with either black insulation tape or a towel painted with black ink. Then, with these knives, he got into a truck and staked out a residential area to ambush the man who failed to appear. Susumu continued to survey the place for 3 more days until February 19th at around 1:30 in the morning when he spotted the husband and his girlfriend walking down the street. Upon seeing them, Susumu rushed in and repeatedly stabbed him in the neck and chest with a sashimi knife. When the girlfriend started screaming for help, he proceeded to stab her multiple times with a sashimi knife and another smaller knife, causing her serious injuries. The husband was decapitated on the spot, while the girlfriend was transported to a nearby hospital with one of the knives still stuck in her back, succumbing to her injuries soon after. At the time of death, the pair were 37 and 40 years old, respectively. In the meantime, Susumu attempted to flee in his truck but was pursued by local residents and an off-duty police sergeant. He then collided with a bike in a narrow alleyway, prompting him to abandon the truck and attempt to flee on foot, but was then caught by an off-duty police officer who had rushed to the scene after receiving an emergency call. During the trial for his first crime, where him and 2 other men killed a random man in an empty lot, the prosecutors requested the death penalty for Susumu. He was found guilty on the charges of murder, theft, and attempted arson and subsequently sentenced to death. His accomplices, 23 and 17 years old, were sentenced to life imprisonment and 15 years imprisonment, respectively. Susumu later appealed the sentence to the Takamatsu High Court, which commuted his sentence to life imprisonment on the grounds that the murder was not premeditated. In that same ruling, his accomplices' sentences were also reduced to 15 and 12 years, respectively. After this, Susumu spent approximately 18 years behind bars, mainly in Okayama prison, from where he occasionally sent money to his victims' family members. He was released on parole in April 1991, and it was after this that he killed the husband and his girlfriend. Upon his rearrest, he was charged with 2 counts of murder, weapons, and parole violations. On August 7, 2001, his trial began at the Osaka District Court. The Osaka District Public Prosecutor's Office announced that they would seek the death penalty, citing the accused's lack of remorse and callousness. On November 20th, Susumu was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death. During the proceedings, he claimed that while he intended to make his victims suffer, he did not intend to kill him. His claims were rejected by the court, which determined that the depths of the wounds inflicted on the victims, the planned nature of the crime, the fact that it was committed while on parole, and the apparent murderous intent contradicted them. Susumu then attempted to appeal to the Osaka High Court, but the sentence was upheld on October 27, 2003. His final appeal to the Supreme Court was also dismissed in a similar manner. He was diagnosed with esophageal cancer in June 2013 and transferred to Osaka Medical Prison in December for treatment. He died at 11:10 p.m. on May 15, 2014. He was 66. Haruno Sakamoto. Haruno Sakamoto was born on June 21, 1927 as the eldest daughter and seventh of 14 siblings to a farming family in Yoshinogawa, Tokushima Prefecture. She grew up in a poor and disadvantaged environment and was only able to attend elementary school for 2 months. She reportedly also suffered from epilepsy. When she was 16, she left home and earned a living as a prostitute in hot spring resorts across the country. In 1954, when she was 27, she was arrested for peddling stimulants and was sentenced to 1 year in prison. She later ran a brothel in Amagasaki, Hyogo Prefecture, but was arrested twice and given suspended prison sentences. She then moved to Kochi Prefecture and worked as a prostitute again for a while before opening a snack bar called Rainbow in the 1970s. There were constant rumors that she was living off insurance money and people called her Octopus behind her back. This was because she would cut off her own limbs to get insurance money. At her peak, she had more than 30 claims, and even during interrogations, it was not possible to find out all of them. It's estimated that Haruno received more than 80 million yen, approximately $475,000 in insurance money from 10 claims. She would borrow money to pay the premiums, and when that became impossible, she would plan an accident and receive the insurance money from it to keep funding the premiums. In 1976, she cut off the index finger on her left hand. She said that she accidentally chopped her finger off while filleting a fish. In 1984, she cut off her big toe. She explained that while chopping firewood, she accidentally hit her big toe. In late September 1988, she fell off her bicycle and injured her left foot and was hospitalized for about 4 months and received hospitalization benefits through her insurance. Haruno also encouraged her younger sister and her husband to commit insurance fraud. Junichi Sakamoto, then 54 years old, was a man of the sea who traveled around the country as a fisherman and finally settled down in Muroto port. In 1980, he married a woman named Keiko Yamashita, but they divorced 3 years later. Junichi, who was unemployed at the time, continued to live in Keiko's house. In 1986, the two were approached by their acquaintance Haruno Sakamoto, then 59 years old, who asked them to live together. Haruno was single at the time and she was running her snack bar Rainbow next to her house. Thus the three of them began living together. Eventually, Haruno and Junichi became involved and they got married in September of the same year. But the three of them continued to live together. Unbeknownst to them, she had ulterior motives in marrying Junichi. She intended to get her husband to take out insurance and then kill him. Prior to this, she was cutting off her own limbs to defraud the insurance companies, but this was the first time she was about to kill someone. She approached his sister and her husband, and the three of them decided to conspire together. In December 1986, Haruno had her husband Junichi take out 2 life insurance policies. He was not keen on the idea and did not see the need for it. He had apparently confided to an acquaintance saying, "I don't want to take out the insurance because I don't have any children to receive it and the amount is too large." But he was happy with the lifestyle that Haruno gave him, where he could go to pachinko parlors and drink alcohol, and in the end he did as he was told and took out the 50 million yen, about $297,000 insurance policy. On the night of January 17, 1987, just after the new year, Haruno's younger sister and her husband came to the Rainbow Snack Bar and the 5 of them drank. Junichi got completely drunk, his ex-wife Keiko fell asleep, and when they were free of anyone to get in their way, the 3 carried out their plan. First, Haruno took Junichi outside the bar and hit him on the head with a rock. After that, they put him into bed, and while the other two held down his arms and legs, she pressed a cushion over his face, suffocating him to death. The death was reported to the life insurance company as a falling accident. Haruno explained, "My husband was drunk and went out to walk the dog, and the dog's chain got wrapped around his leg, causing him to fall and hit his head hard." There was only one wound on his head, but it was not fatal, and the cause of death was heart failure. The insurance premium had only been paid twice, making it very suspicious, but the whole amount was paid out. Of that, 20 million yen, approximately $119,000 was given to the sister and her husband, and the rest was pocketed by Haruno. 4.5 years after the murder of her husband, in 1992, Haruno planned her next insurance murder. The target was Keiko, the ex-wife, then 60 years old. They were still living together, and Haruno decided to conspire with an insurance agency owner who was in debt. He was one of the few customers at the Rainbow Snack Bar and was the one who handled the procedures for her insurance fraud. She promised him 7 million yen, or about $56,000 as a reward. The murder took place on August 19th when the two of them hit Keiko over the head with a rock while she was sleeping in a room at the back of Rainbow and killed her by covering her mouth and nose with their hands. They dumped her body on a nearby street to make it look like a traffic accident. At 12:40 a.m., a man driving by found Keiko lying on the ground in her pajamas. By the time the police arrived, she was already dead. Haruno had intended to fake the accident, but the pillow was found covered in blood on a nearby beach. She was questioned by the police. Regarding her actions that day, she stated, "I was watching TV with Keiko at night, but I went to bed around 10 p.m. When questioned about the bloodstains in the room, she insisted that she didn't know. In the end, there was no conclusive evidence and was never arrested. She tried to claim about 35 million yen, about $281,000 in insurance money from the company. However, this time the insurance company was suspicious, so she was unable to collect it. The police marked her as a suspect and continued their investigation. Haruno fully admitted to the charges at the first hearing, but later denied murdering her husband Junichi and claimed innocence, saying that her confession was coerced. The three accomplices also claimed innocence. No autopsy was performed on Junichi. The investigation headquarters determined that the murder weapon, a pickling stone, was found in the same place as Haruno's statement, and therefore found that the allegations corroborated. The presiding judge rejected all of the defendants' claim of innocence during the trial, stating that the confessions made during the investigation were specific, realistic, and highly credible in a way that only someone who experienced the crime could say. At the sentencing hearing on July 29, 1998, the Kochi District Court sentenced her to death. In addition, the sister and her husband, who were accomplices, were sentenced to life imprisonment, and Hamada, the man working for an insurance company, was sentenced to 15 years. All four defendants appealed. In the appeal trial, Haruno claimed innocence, claiming that Hamada was the sole perpetrator of the murders of Junichi and Keiko. She also claimed that the death penalty was unconstitutional. However, on September 28, 2000, the appeals of all four defendants were dismissed. The sister and her husband did not appeal, and their life sentences were finalized. At 77 years old, Haruno was the oldest person in the post-war period on death row at the time. It was also the first time since 1966 that a defendant over 70 years old had been sentenced to death on appeal. Since there are no facilities for carrying out death sentences in Shikoku, Haruno Sakamoto was incarcerated in the Osaka detention house. She was said to be a lively old woman for someone nearing 80 years of age. Regarding the large amount of insurance money that was defrauded, she reportedly said nonchalantly, "I pay the insurance premiums properly, so it's only natural that I get it if something happens. Everyone does it." A tumor was discovered around September 2010 and she was transferred from Osaka Detention House in December and underwent treatment. She died of liver cancer on January 27, 2011 at Osaka Medical Prison. She was 83 years old. Kazuo Sawachi. Kazuo, who worked for the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department, was promoted to inspector after serving as a riot police officer. In January 1980, he quit his job at the age of 40, thinking of opening his own restaurant. 3 months later, as planned, he opened an izakaya called Hashicho in a prime location at the west exit of Shinjuku Station. The restaurant was medium-sized with 60 seats and a banquet hall. It was a reckless challenge for an amateur like him. He borrowed a total of 40 million yen or $177,000 from various places in order to start up. Considering his financial situation, this amount was beyond his means. Aiming to create a restaurant where police officers can drink with peace of mind, the restaurant was booming at first, with many customers coming to give their blessings. This caused him to become completely careless. He became too cocky, offered cheap prices to his former colleagues, and would take his employees out drinking after closing time. Taking advantage of this, he also began to live a luxurious life. This was possible because he had not yet started paying off his debts. When he started paying off his debts about 6 months after opening, he suddenly found it difficult to make ends meet. As the deficit began to mount, he began to turn to high-interest consumer loan companies. He even borrowed money from a former colleague of his who was a police officer and had him act as a guarantor for his debts. At that time, the building in which his store was located went bankrupt and he lost his right to the 25 million yen deposit. He asked a member of the Yakuza to collect the money, but failed. After a long period of trying to find money, he was forced to close his store. It had only been 3 years since opening. His debt had blown up more than triple what he initially borrowed, of which a third of it he borrowed from former fellow police officers. More than 20 police officers provided financial support to Kazuo. Some of these loans resulted in the seizure of their homes and disruption to their livelihoods. In order to repay his debts, he became involved with unscrupulous people such as brokers and financial institutions, and he fell deeper into trouble. He was once invited by a member of a Yakuza group to become the president of a company that handled underground videos for a monthly salary of 500,000 yen. This was of course a shell company whose purpose was to commit fraud. One day, Kazuo was asked by a member of a Yakuza group to cash in a bill. But he used the 1 million yen he cashed in to repay his debts and was forced to amputate his pinky finger. After that, he tried to get back on his feet and started an investigation company in Chiba Prefecture with the 1 million yen he borrowed from the president of a different financial company, but a middleman ran off with the money. At that time, a Korean man named Park Ryuju, then 48 years old, living in Japan, approached him with a money-making opportunity. He wanted information on police raids to open an illegal poker game parlor. Kazuo was immediately interested in the idea when he was told that he could make 100 to 200 million yen, or 441,000 to 882,000 US dollars in 6 months. But he was not confident that he could get the police information. In the end, the underground poker plan did not go ahead, so Kazuo consulted Park, saying, "I want money even if I have to kill someone." Park then said he would introduce him to a certain man. In comes Takeo Inokuma. The man was a real estate agent, then 35, who also had a large amount of debt. Thus, the three of them came up with a plan to deceive a jeweler and steal his money. There was no way the targeted man could win against a trained former police officer. A brawl ensued and the man collapsed and was killed by the 3 men. They buried his body under the floor and stole his cash and jewelry. As they couldn't remove the ring from the man's finger, Kazuo cut off the finger and took it home. In this way, they succeeded in stealing about 54 million yen or 240,000 US dollars. About a year after closing the izakaya, Kazuo had stooped down to this level. The second crime was committed by Kazuo and Takeo as Park had fled to South Korea after the first crime. The next target was a financial broker. Kazuo had borrowed 10 million yen, about $44,000 from her, including a loan in the name of his son who was a police officer. He fell behind on the repayments, so she went to Kanda police station where her son worked to collect the money directly from him. Kazuo didn't like that and made her his next target. The two men tricked her into their car, killed her, and buried the body in the same place as the previous murder. They stole a total of about 49 million yen, approximately $216,000. Kazuo confessed to the crimes and Park was also arrested based on his statement. Meanwhile, when Takeo learned of Kazuo's arrest, he took an acquaintance and headed to the villa. He dug under the floorboards, put the two bodies in futon bags, tied them with hemp rope and buried them in a forest in Hadano City, about 50 kilometers away. He acted on the basis of Kazuo's repeated words that if the bodies are not found, they will not be found guilty. Takeo was arrested 10 days later while hiding at a friend's house. Based on his confession, the two bodies were retrieved from the forest. It was so well buried that it would not have been possible to find them without his detailed directions. In October 1987, both Kazuo and Takeo were sentenced to death and Park to life imprisonment. They all appealed, but to no avail. Kazuo's son, who worked at Kanda police station, was encouraged to resign from his job after the incident, and so he did. He was diagnosed with stomach cancer in October 2007, but surgery was unsuccessful and after refusing chemotherapy and other treatments, died of multiple organ failure on December 16, 2008. He was 69. Katsutoshi Teshiba. A real estate broker, Mineo Suga, claiming to be the president of a company, began soliciting around 50 landowners in a planned industrial park development site in the west of Ogori City, Fukuoka Prefecture, from around January 1996, saying that he wanted to buy the land. Suga and real estate broker Katsutoshi Teshiba obtained land purchase and sales contracts and seal certificates from most of the landowners, saying that they were necessary for the application to convert the land to agricultural land for development, and planned to use them to resell the land. However, the CEO of a real estate company in Tosu City, Saga Prefecture, who was in charge of looking after the landowners, became an obstacle, so they decided to kill him. At around 11:30 p.m. on June 8th, after a meeting with the landowners held in the city, they called the CEO who had previously asked the two for a loan, saying that they had prepared the cash, and summoned him to a workshop where they strangled him to death and buried him in a vacant lot in town. On November 19th, they murdered the then 54-year-old CEO of a construction company in an apartment after deceiving him into coming to the city with a fictitious construction project for a huge sum of money, stole 2 promissory notes issued by the company the CEO ran, with a total face of 41 million yen or approximately $377,000 and 9 million yen or $83,000 in cash, and buried the body in a reclaimed land in the same town. They were both arrested on February 24th on suspicion of abandoning the company CEO's body after it was found in April. In March 2010, Katsutoshi was diagnosed with metastatic bone tumors and prostate cancer and was undergoing medical treatment. On the morning of April 14th, he did not wake up at his usual time and was found not breathing. He was rushed to the hospital but was pronounced dead. The cause of death was cerebellar hemorrhage. He was 66 years old. Kaiichi Yamamoto. Kaiichi shot and killed 5 gang bosses in Iruma City, Saitama Prefecture in December 2003. His relationship with a gang boss from the same family and others had deteriorated due to certain disputes. On December 14, 2003, he visited the Hosoda Group office with 2 automatic pistols and, in the living room on the first floor, fired 2 shots from the handgun, killing the boss. He then killed a senior member of another group and his younger brother, as well as 2 members who were in the next room. Presiding Judge Shinichiro Fukusaki sentenced him to death as requested, calling the crime a cruel and vicious act based on the antisocial thinking typical of a rotten villain. Although he was diagnosed with cancer in August 2009, he did not want surgery and continued to receive minimal treatment. His condition worsened from November and he was receiving treatment in the detention center, but he died of liver cancer at 11:12 p.m. on January 2, 2010. He was 62. Eiji Ishibashi. Eiji was indicted for stabbing a taxi driver to death while trying to steal his profits, and then stabbing a worker the following year and setting fire to his house, burning him to death. He confessed to the taxi murder during the investigation, but his statements changed during the first trial and he ultimately denied them completely. The first trial found his confession unreliable and found him not guilty of the taxi murder, with a sentence of life imprisonment for the second murder. However, the appeal court found his confession credible and overturned the first trial verdict, finding him guilty of both crimes and sentencing him to death. He had been complaining of poor health since early September 2009 and had been receiving antibiotics, but died of pneumonia on October 27th, aged 72. Ilkwang Park. At around 5 p.m. on January 12, 1995, Harumi Fujiwara, then 41 years old and the owner of a bar in Mizuho Ward, Nagoya City, was murdered with a knife by Park Il-kwang, an unemployed Korean national, then 48 years old. Harumi was his ex-wife. He was arrested on suspicion of theft and was released from prison the previous year in 1994. During this time, he learned that Harumi had married another man and in a grudge continued to harass her, sending her threatening letters announcing his intention to kill her. After killing Harumi, Park fled to Fukuoka City where he had previously lived. Gradually running out of money, he got into a taxi on the street in Chuo Ward, Fukuoka City one early morning. He then took the opportunity to stab the driver in the neck with a kitchen knife, killing him and robbing him of several thousand yen. Aichi Prefectural Police conducted a background check in the investigation into Harumi's murder. Park, her former husband, who had been serving time in prison until the previous year, came to the forefront of the investigation. They then conducted a search of his apartment in Nagoya City and discovered bloodstains on his clothes. After finding him hiding out in Nara Prefecture, he was arrested on suspicion of murder. Park remained silent during questioning and denied the crime, but the bloodstains found in the apartment matched Harumi's DNA, and in the case of the Fukuoka taxi driver murder, bloodstains on a knife found near JR Minami Fukuoka Station matched Park's and the driver's DNA. On June 14, 1999, the Fukuoka District Court sentenced Park to death. He appealed the decision, claiming that an acquaintance killed Harumi and that he did not remember the taxi crime well because he had taken sleeping pills. On March 28, 2003, the Fukuoka High Court dismissed the appeal and upheld the lower court's ruling. Although he appealed again, on November 24th, the Supreme Court dismissed the case and his death sentence was finalized. He complained of a fever around noon on January 3, 2009 and was given antibiotics. Seeing that he had not waken up even after 8 a.m. on the following day, the 4th, the staff called out to him, but he did not respond. He was taken to the hospital where he was confirmed dead at 9:18 a.m. The cause of death was pneumonia. He was 62 years old. Masao Arai. A grocery store owner, his wife and daughter were murdered inside the store in Miura City, Kanagawa Prefecture in 1971. Masao was arrested based on the eyewitness testimony of his middle school-aged son who escaped the scene. His death sentence was finalized by the Supreme Court in 1990. The final ruling included bloodstains on a tool bag found in the trunk of Masao's car as evidence of his guilt, claiming that they were from the victims. However, a DNA test conducted in 2013 at the request of the defense concluded that the bloodstains did not match those of the victims. The defense submitted the results of this test to the summary appeal hearing in June of the same year, but the Tokyo High Court dismissed the request in October 2020. The defense filed a special appeal, but the Supreme Court dismissed it in April 2022. And thus, his death sentence was finalized. He had been receiving treatment for high blood pressure and diabetes since 2003. He was moved to a hospital ward in the spring of 2009, but his condition worsened around mid-July. He died of sepsis at 7:55 a.m. on September 3rd at 82 years old. Makoto Watahiki. On October 16, 1978, a phone call was made to the home of a junior high school girl, A, demanding a ransom of 30 million yen, approximately $160,000 in 1978 exchange rates. He had kidnapped her and killed her an hour before the call was made. Makoto lured A, who was coming home from school, to go for a drive and took her to a deserted area. There, he used chloroform to knock her out. He also attempted to commit other unspeakable acts on her, but failed. A's body was discovered the following day, October 17th, in a grassy area, having been strangled to death, and the police began an investigation into the case as a kidnapping and murder for ransom. Makoto, who had come under investigation due to his lack of an alibi and large debts, was subsequently arrested. He was indicted on charges of kidnapping and murder for ransom. He had built a good relationship with A, who looked up to him like an older brother. Makoto's wife and A's mother were actually sisters, and he received financial support from their wealthy family because they had a close family relationship. However, at the time, he had a large debt due to the fact that his company was not doing well and he had traveled to Korea to meet a female entertainer and maintain an affair with her. The prosecution sought the death penalty, but the defense sought to avoid it, stating that there was only one victim, that Makoto had no criminal record, and that he was remorseful. However, on February 8, 1980, the Mito District Court sentenced him to death. The ruling stated that the crime was planned and that the death penalty was the only option, even considering the circumstances favorable to the defendant. He was found slumped in his cell at around 7 p.m. on June 5, 2013. He was diagnosed with subarachnoid hemorrhage, which is a bleeding between the brain and the surrounding membrane. By the time he was taken to a hospital, he was already unconscious and was subsequently placed in the intensive care unit, but was confirmed dead just before 8 p.m. on the 23rd. He was 74 years old. Kenji Ota and Minoru Ito. On the morning of July 13, 2000, a former gang boss, Minoru Ito, and Chinese national B broke into the house of another gang boss in Takaoka, Toyama Prefecture and shot him and his wife to death. The police investigated Minoru on suspicion of murder in September of the same year. After questioning, B and 2 others were also arrested. One of the other men arrested was Kenji Ota, who ordered the hit. He claimed that he had not requested the murder of the boss's wife, but the Toyama District Court ruled that he was fully aware that the wife would be killed. In 2009, Minoru was sentenced to death and the Chinese national B to 18 years in prison as he played a limited role in the murders, such as being the lookout. On January 27, 2004, the court found Kenji guilty and sentenced him to death. All appeals were dismissed and both of their sentences were finalized in mid-2009. Minoru Ito. On April 19, 2009, he vomited blood in his cell at the Nagoya detention house where he was being held. He was hospitalized but died at 6:16 p.m. on May 2nd at the hospital from hemorrhagic shock due to liver failure. He was 56 years old. Kenji Ota. He was diagnosed with colon cancer on March 2014 and underwent surgery, but the cancer had already spread to his liver and other organs. He died of liver failure on the afternoon of July 16th at 67 years old. Kazuo Okikura. It was around 8 p.m. on April 9, 2008, when Kazuo, then 60, and his accomplice, then 64, broke into the home of Miss A and Mr. B, 54 and 51 years old respectively. They were wealthy siblings living in Akiruno City. Kazuo reportedly pointed a knife at Mr. B, who was home alone, and threatened him by saying, "This is a robbery. Please give us your money." This polite manner of speech, which is unusual for a robber, is probably related to the fact that he was a civil servant who had worked for the city hall for many years. However, the crime that he committed later with his accomplice was so cruel that there was no room for excuses. First, the accomplice bound Mr. B's hands and feet with adhesive tape. Then, as they were searching the room, Miss A returned home. He pointed the same knife at her and threatened her, saying, "I'm a robber. I've come to take your money." Her hands and feet were also tied with duct tape. The two stole 350,000 yen, or about $4,000 in cash, and 35 credit cards from the wealthy siblings. The two men then put plastic bags over the heads of the siblings whose hands and feet were tied and wrapped duct tape around their necks to seal the bags. They left them there until they eventually suffocated to death. Afterwards, they transported the bodies to Nagano and buried them in the mountains. They wasted no time to withdraw more than 5 million yen, about $57,000 in cash using their ATM cards, and were eventually arrested. The accomplice was first to admit his guilt and was sentenced to life imprisonment at the Tachikawa branch of the Tokyo District Court, where he was found to have shown deep remorse. On the other hand, Kazuo was sentenced to death because he was found to have played a leading role throughout. While in custody in June 2013, he was diagnosed with lung cancer, which later metastasized. After his death sentence was finalized in June 2014, he was transferred to the intensive care unit of the detention center, but died of a brain tumor on July 2, 2014. He was 66. Ryoji Ui. He was sentenced to death for murdering women in 1977 and 1979. One of them was his girlfriend, whom he strangled to death in anger when she refused to repay her debt and tried to leave. He was diagnosed with bile duct cancer in April 2007 and received treatment at Osaka Medical Prison. He died on February 7, 2008, aged 68. Akie Murahashi. When Akie found out that her husband had a mistress, she planned to kill him and get his retirement money. She conspired with the mistress to make it look like a carbon monoxide poisoning and killed her husband. She then killed another man, the husband of a hostess she employed. She paid compensation to the family of the second victim, and after her death sentence in the appeal hearing, the family submitted a petition requesting a lenient sentence. She claimed innocence, saying that the murder of her husband was a suicide, and in 1991 requested a retrial. However, she was sentenced to death. On May 14, 2007, she was diagnosed with acute myocardial infarction and received treatment at a hospital in Tokyo, but died of pneumonia on July 17, aged 75. Hiromoto Haruyama. A student and a female department store clerk were assaulted and murdered, their bodies abandoned. A housewife was assaulted and seriously injured. The DNA found at the scenes matched that of Hiromoto, with a probability of 1 in 2,500. Hiromoto admitted to the crimes during the investigation stage, but in the middle of the trial, he denied them, saying, "The police kept bothering me and I went crazy, so I told them to do whatever they wanted to me," and claimed innocence and that he was wrongfully arrested. A new defense team was formed just before the first hearing of the appeal and thoroughly re-examined the court records and the crime scene, submitting a summary of the hearing and supplementary documents that argued his innocence from various angles. 5 years later, a second hearing was held. In 1992, the defense team requested a retrial, and the Sapporo High Court, of its own accord, carried out a DNA analysis of the bodily fluids remaining in the victim's body, but the DNA matched that of Hiromoto. He was sentenced to death. In December 2003, he underwent surgery for advanced stomach cancer at Hachioji Medical Prison and returned to Sapporo Prison in April 2004. He was confirmed dead at 7:40 a.m. on June 4, 2004, due to general exhaustion caused by his cancer. He was 70 years old. Tsuneki Toyama. Late at night on August 26, 1963, a man, 35 years old at the time, from Ibaraki Prefecture began to suffer after returning home and died at the hospital where he was taken. The man was made to take out a 6 million yen life insurance policy and was forced to swallow a capsule containing a cyanide compound. Before his death, the man muttered, "Tsuneki made me take drugs." Cyanide compounds were found in his body, and the police began investigating the case as a murder. Tsuneki Toyama, who was the husband of the victim's cousin, was arrested on suspicion of forgery and use of a private document. In November of the same year, he was also indicted for attempted murder back in 1959. He was sentenced to death in both the first and second trials, and on April 1, 1976, the Supreme Court rejected his appeal and the sentence was finalized. He was later found not guilty of the attempted murder in 1959. After that, a retrial was requested twice but was rejected because he had not submitted clear evidence to prove his innocence. The Supreme Court judge at the time used this case as an opportunity to advocate the abolition of the death penalty. There are rumors that Tsuneki Toyama was falsely accused. While preparing for his third request for retrial, he died of chronic renal failure at 1:48 a.m. on September 3, 2003, aged 86, in Tokyo Detention House where he was being held. In his later years, he was bedridden and received blood transfusions and dialysis due to chronic kidney failure. Masaru Ueda. In 1993, he killed a former colleague with a metal bat in order to send money to a Filipino woman he was dating. He stole 4,000 yen, about $37, but the amount was too small, so he killed the owner of a ramen stand with a metal bat and stole about 135,000 yen, or $1,300. On the morning of February 27, 2003, he complained of dizziness and headaches and barely ate breakfast or lunch. He was examined by a doctor and was able to eat by that evening. However, at around 2 a.m., staff noticed something was wrong. Despite all their effort, he was confirmed dead at around 2:25 a.m. He was only 33 years old. Tomizo Ishida. In a fit of rage, he killed his girlfriend, a housewife, after she brought up breaking up with him, then stole her cash and burned her body. The following year, he tried to assault a female restaurant owner while robbing her, but she resisted, so he killed her. He claimed innocence in the second case and no intent to kill in the first, but was sentenced to death. Tomizo was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2009 and was undergoing treatment. On April 16, 2014, he was transferred to the intensive care unit, but he died just before 9 a.m. on the 19th. He was 92 years old. Sho Tamura. In 1976, Tamura visited a neighbor's house, and after making sure that only the eldest daughter, a junior high school student, and her cousin were home, he went in and stabbed them in the chest with a kitchen knife, killing them. He stole their rings and other items, poured kerosene over them, set the house on fire, and burned it down. He was diagnosed with lung cancer in June 2013 and was undergoing treatment at the detention center's medical facility. His condition worsened in October and he died on November 15th, aged 62. Katsunori Ota. On the night of the incident, Katsunori visited the victim's house A and asked for a grace period for payment of a fox fur he purchased from him. However, A had ties to a gang and refused. In addition, A had brought a .22 caliber automatic rifle and waved it around his chest, which frightened Katsunori, so he took the rifle and shot A, followed by A's wife and his child, then only 2 years old, all in the head. Katsunori then went up to the second floor and shot A's second child, who was trying to escape, also in the head. After that, he shot A and his wife 2 more times and the children once more, killing all 4 of them. The investigation headquarters named Katsunori as one of the suspects immediately after the incident, but the investigation was difficult due to a lack of physical evidence. At the end of September 1980, based on the testimony of the perpetrator of another crime, cartridges and bullets that he had test-fired for poaching prior to the crime were found. They were discovered to have been fired from the same gun as those left at the gruesome crime scene. Katsunori was then arrested on the morning of November 15, 1980, 1 year and 4 months after the crime. He refused to testify at the trial and on March 23, 1984, he was sentenced to death by the Sapporo District Court. He appealed the sentence for injustice, but on May 19, 1987, the Sapporo High Court dismissed his appeal. On November 8, 1999, while taking a bath in the detention center, he cut the right side of his neck with a razor. He was treated in the medical room but died about 30 minutes later from blood loss. The wound reached his artery and there was also a cut on his left wrist. There were 3 suicide notes addressed to his family in his cell, dated the 7th, and saying, "I'm sorry for causing you so much trouble." He was 55 years old. Alright guys, that concludes the second and final part of this special episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Next time we're going to go back to the creepy horror stories from Japan. So I'll see you again then. Thank you so much for tuning in again. Cheers.